Ready?
Ready.
All right. I'd like to call the July 25, 2022 Lake Charles Harbor and Terminal District meeting together. If we could all rise, please.
Please face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would you bow your head, please? Our most gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for all that you have given to us. We ask that you please pass your blessings on to our board of members here tonight so that we can make the right decisions for the people that we do represent. And we ask all of that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Darbone and Mr. Dixon. Okay, the board encourages public comments and questions regarding all agenda items. Persons wishing to do so should complete a speaker's card, which is at the entrance to the boardroom. When speaking or asking a question on an agenda item, one should, in addition to completing the card, come to the microphone to be recognized and provide your name, address, and phone number. Comments by individuals will be limited to 3 minutes. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the June 27 regular meeting.
Mr. President, I move that we adopt the minutes of the June 27th meeting.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Creelo, second by Mr. Guidry. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next matter is submission number 2022-037.
Yes, staff requests board adoption of the 2022 millage rate of 2.48 mils. We received the ad valorem taxable assessment from the Calhoun Parish tax assessor. The total dollar amount was about $1.8 billion for the properties within the Ports District. That's slightly lower, just ever so slightly lower than the 2021 assessed value. The millage rate's the same because it's not a revaluation year, and we estimate that it will yield about $4.4 million in ad valorem taxes for the board.
Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Dixon.
Second.
Second by Mr. Prudhomme. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The next submission on the agenda is submission number 2022-038. Mr. Self?
Yes, sir. Board approval is sought to enter into a 5-year extension of the real estate lease option agreement with Lake Charles LNG Export Company, LLC, which is formerly Trunkline, for 120 acres of district property and 40 acres of property under option with Prairie Land Company. There's actually 3 submissions tonight that we're submitting to you for approval. They're actually all 3 option agreements. This is the first of the 3. It includes 120 acres that are owned by the port, 40 acres owned by Prairie Land. It's an agreement between the port. This first one is between the port and Lake Charles LNG. This extension will provide Lake Charles LNG with additional time for permitting and the engineering and design related to their project. And we have Mr. Jeff Brightwell in attendance if you have any questions.
All right, let's see. Do we have a motion first regarding 2022-038?
I make a motion to approve submission 2022-038.
Okay, Mr. Darbone moves.
Second.
Mr. Guidry seconds. Discussion?
So
Go ahead.
if I could ask Mr. Brightwell to come maybe give us an update on the project.
Just a general update. Yeah, so appreciate your consideration tonight. The project really was derailed with COVID in 2020 and the exit of our partner Shell. And we've been a little bit idle for the past 2 years with the events in Europe and the pressures on gas supply. Obviously, there's been a lot more interest We've signed up about 35% of our capacity through SBAs in the last few months, and expect to get the rest signed up here over the coming months, and have a lot of good interest in the project right now. So we're currently working with our engineering companies to refresh the engineering work and to refresh the pricing, and then hopefully proceed early next year.
Who is your EPC?
We're working with Bechtel.
Bechtel?
I guess my question is, originally it was presented as a 2-year, correct? And then now we're at a 5. Is there something in the mix that's needing to tie it up for 5 years, or?
It's really not anticipating that there will be any problems, but knowing we started this in 2013 and entered a couple of problems with, with some unexpected pressures in the market from COVID and the exit of a partner. Just trying to keep our options open for the long term. But we have strong commitment to completion of the project, and just don't want to have to be renegotiating ongoing on this.
And John, it's got the CPI adjustment in it, so if it goes, the lease has CPI
Yes, sir.
adjustments in it?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay.
John, could you kind of tell us how is that CPI determined?
The CPI is a nationally published number based on several economic factors, and that there's a determination made about how much of an increase, a percentage-wise increase, will apply to the underlying rent rate, the per decatherm throughput amount, and then the minimum throughput amount that they have to pay us. And that is, according to the lease, every 5 years that is calculated and applied to the underlying rental rate. So it helps keep your rental rates current with economic conditions, if that makes.
And for this particular, how would that be determined? I mean, how would you come up with a CPI on this immovable property?
Well, it applies to the dollar amount. So they say that, the economy increased, or a CPI is of, let's say, 5%. It went up 5%, then you apply 5% to the underlying rental rate, whatever that is, dollar amount, and then that's your new rental rate. Does that answer your question?
So it's not strictly for other immovable property that's located on a ship channel. It is strictly the
CPI is
same
just-
as what applies to bananas.
Theoretically, it's supposed to keep your rates current with economic factors, but that's on a national scale. No, it does, to specifically answer your question, it does not mean that this property has only increased in value at 5% if the CPI is 5%. Does that make sense? It could very easily be that property has increased 50%, or it decreased 20%. It's just a way to kind of, in general, keep your values in step with the growing economy.
So in fact, if the CPI was negative, we would be collecting less?
No, ma'am. Our language in our lease specifically says that the rate shall never decrease, it shall only increase. So if there is a negative CPI, we stay where we are. And that's negotiated in this lease.
And for that same project, how many other acres is under contract or under lease?
In addition to this, about 310.
Going back to a lease from the 70s, I don't know the exact date, the old trunk line project, they locked in about 300 acres for a very long time. So that's separate from this issue here. We're talking about 120 acres, which is north of what I'll call the old trunk line facility. And then it's 120 acres there, 40 acres from prairie land, and then 25 acres kind of on a shorter term basis for a parking lot.
But as John pointed out, 310 acres for their main plant site it's a totally different agreement than this. And Carl, just to clarify your question, you had asked about the CPI. There's a CPI on the underlying agreement, not the option fee.
That's right. Yeah, the underlying agreement, the CPI is in place. It's calculated every 5 years.
Not on the option, the 5-year option.
Right.
Well, no, because the option will be terminated by the time we, would have applied the CPI, because the underlying lease applies the CPI every 5 years, unless you were going to add a CPI every year, which we didn't do on this one. questions for me?
Other questions? No. All right. We'll call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, next is the submission number 2022-039. Mr. Self, anything additional?
Sure. Board approval is sought to enter into a 5-year extension of the real estate lease option with Prairie Land to lease approximately 40 acres of property from them in connection with the expansion of the Lake Charles LNG Export Company, formerly Trunkline LNG, for their export project. This agreement, and this option agreement, is between the port and Prairie Land for the land, 40 acres that we discussed in the previous option agreement. This is the 40 acres that Prairie Land owns. So the port's leasing that, and then with your approval on the previous option, we lease that to Lake Charles LNG.
All right, is there a motion?
Mr. President, I move that we adopt submission 2022-039.
I'll second.
Motion by Mr. Prudham, second by Mr. Crelo. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Submission 2022-040, authorizing an option with Lake Charles LNG for the Lincoln Road property. Mr. Self?
Board approval is sought to enter into a 5-year extension of the real estate lease option agreement with Lake Charles LNG, formerly Trunkline, to lease approximately 25 acres of district property for construction work or parking in connection with the future LNG export project. This is the third and final of the 3 option agreements that we're presenting to you. This one is back to the port and Lake Charles LNG. It's for 25 acres on the Lincoln Road, and it's estimated, it's the option fee is $33,000 per year.
All right, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve 2022-040.
second it.
Motion by Mr. Dixon, second by Mr. Guidry. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up is submission 2022-041, authorizing, ratifying, and confirming actions taken on July 8, 2022. Mr. Self?
Yes, sir. Staff requests the Board of Commissioners to ratify the required documents and purchase orders with Bruin Environmental and Remediation LLC for the demolition and cleanup of 498 Fournette Street, Lake Charles, Louisiana. As you'll recall, back in early July, we asked for your ratification via email vote to approve up to $240,000 for the demo and environmental services of Bruin. We had entered into a purchase order with Bruin. As issues arose on that site, we quickly moved in the project so that Nick could put it out for bid because it was becoming evident that it was going to go over. If we were to continue, it would go over the bid amount. This dates back to an agreement that was terminated with the port in the early 1990s. And Nick is working on a bid that'll go out in the next 30 days to complete the project.
All right, do we hear a motion on 2022-042?
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that we approve submission 2022-041.
Oh, I'm sorry, 041.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Ms. McCleary, second by Mr. Darbones. Discussion?
Mr. President, I've got a couple of questions that, I guess, one, Ricky, you know, when you reached out for board approval to increase your authority, my position was that I didn't want to cause any delays and further impact potential costs to the port, so naturally I'm in favor of it. My concern is that the way the project went out, knowing that they had tanks on the site and a potential environmental issue, what was done ahead of time before you issued the purchase order? And the second part, I guess this goes to Nick, is what are you going to do different going forward to go out for a contract?
Absolutely. So initially, we had our environmental consultant as well as Regan Brown. They went on site, inspected the tanks as best as possible. Access was limited. However, we determined there was water in some of the tanks based on previous correspondence with DEQ and other consultants over the last, 15, 20 years. We were under the impression that the water was clean. Knowing that it had some liquid in the tanks, though, the plan was to rent some large frac tanks. I think I outlined this in the email, so forgive me from repeating. But that was the plan, was to mitigate the risk of having liquids in there. We would rent some tanks, actually one tank, pump all the liquid from the multiple tanks into it, and then we would test that, and that way it could sit in the rental tank while we demo everything else, and then we could dispose of the liquid properly. Really the big problem came in the amount of liquids that we found. The first, I think, couple tanks were as we expected, just mostly water, nothing too drastic. And then as you know through the emails, we got into the what we'll call the tank bottoms, where they had old oily residue and everything else. So to mitigate that moving forward, we have a much better idea of the amount of liquids. We've found more DEQ information that identifies an oil water separator that was also found on the site. Just today, we're continuing to find more information. We know how large it is now. We can pull samples on that material and decide if some of it's recyclable, some of it has to be disposed of. We've already sought prices for disposal of the liquids as well as the soils that we're going to have to excavate underneath some of the tanks. So we have a lot more information going forward in this public bid. So we'll be able to apply unit rate costs and estimated quantities on everything, on the liquids, the soil disposal, the amount of tanks that are left, the amount of piping that are left. And that's how we plan to mitigate this moving forward. We'll get unit rates up front, so that way we know exactly what we're bidding going forward. So even if we don't have the exact quantity, as we unearth more things, we'll have a unit rate that's been publicly bid.
Okay. And did you have an environmental firm engaged when you did the purchase order?
Yes, sir, Southland Environmental.
And they didn't?
Well, no, they
didn't discover there was liquids in the tank?
They discovered there was liquids, and Regan, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, the tanks were heavily damaged after the hurricane. Plus, the tanks they're in a state of disrepair, and especially after the hurricane. You can't actually access the top of the tanks. It's unsafe to climb on the tanks. And so a lot of the estimates were wrong initially because they were based on sounding on the tank. And it's an imperfect way to try to do a measurement of pressure in the tanks. But that was what was used at the time. And so that's all we have to go to base it on.
So to answer your question, now we've been able to pull samples on the liquids that are in there, so we have a much better idea of
And you have a way to get up in the tank and check it now, but you didn't before?
No, we've already taken the water out of the tanks and put them in the rental tank. So now that we've gotten the water out, we've been able to sample it and everything. Yeah.
I just want to interject, if I may, Mr. President.
Please.
So, Nick, help me out. I mean, all the refineries we have around here in Calcasieu Parish and the tanks that we have, so there was no way for you guys to check what was in that tank prior to?
There was probably a way to check in that, cutting open, but the manways and everything that are on the bottom of the tanks, the liquid.
They don't have any kind of levels that tell the level of what's in the
They
tank
do
for you
have
to judge if
level
there's liquids in it?
indicators, But no, they don't work. The level indicators on the external side of the tank didn't work. Not all the tanks were accessible, say for a man lift. You could drive a man lift up and extend out, maybe look into the top of the ones that had a lid. Two of them had floating lids, so you're not sure, what's underneath it. You can see down top, might be water on top of the lid.
So my understanding, those tanks are pretty much outdated, they're old tanks?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you
That
mention
helps.
they had floating lids on top?
Because we got too many refineries here in Calcasieu Parish, man, not to find out what's inside that tank.
Yeah.
You
And
know?
like I said, there was DEQ statements that said that they were clean, and had, water residue in them. So we didn't just base it on a guess.
Okay.
Mr. President, may I?
Please.
The administration knows my position on this situation. It's been, I truly believe that this needs to be cleaned up. Our environment needs not be polluted any longer than it has to be, but I'm extremely disappointed in the way the Port Administration has approached this problem. It's been a 30-year problem, and it's festered, and now it's at our doorstep, and we have to do something about it. There are laws and regulations in place that make the responsible party, and I'm sure our agreements with the operator indemnifies the Port of Lake Charles, and we've lost that opportunity, and now we've got to pay the piper. I'm extremely disappointed.
Keith, and John and I have already expressed to you, we completely agree. I mean, something should have done in the 1990s when the lease was terminated, no doubt.
And I just want to echo what Mr. Prudhomme said. I think the concern is sort of the oh my God reaction of finding out what we were faced with, and then the risk that suggests of, is this replicated somewhere else? That's really, I think, the danger or the concern, and that's what I hope is being addressed by the administration. Of if this was allowed to happen, somebody needs to be assigned the responsibility of ferreting out whether a problem like this, a danger like this, a risk like this exists somewhere else in the inventory of properties or locations or whatever, because we need to know sooner rather than later.
Right.
And again, whether it's somebody's going to have a ladder or cherry picker, if not, we'll loan them one to get up on and find out what's in a tank.
Hey, just to clarify, Mr. President, I guess.
This just sounded bad. It doesn't pass the smell test.
Absolutely. And as of recently as of, I think it was 2012, DEQ, basically there was monitoring wells on site prior to that point. And in 2012, DEQ issued a no further action, basically assuming that that's whenever they state, look, the site is clear, no longer have to monitor the site, tanks are fine, they've been cleaned, and all is done. So it's not like we didn't have leaking facilities going on. Basically, they were fine as is. It's when we wanted to demolish them because of the hurricane damage and get them off site. That's when we realized the extent of the material that has to be disposed of that was inside. So we weren't creating an environmental issue, just to clarify. It's just to get rid of them. It's an environmental issue.
The reality is we're trying to clean up a prior environmental issue.
Right.
Another thing I'd like to know, the port bought the property with all the tanks on it in 1983 thereabouts. So we can't, obviously none of us were around in 1983, but that's what occurred. We bought the property in 1983 with these 10, 12 tanks on the property from Lowell. So there was nothing done back then when we bought the property.
But to further as you said, Mr. Lawrence, that's not the way we like to bid projects at all. So we don't want to ever do that again moving forward. I don't want to have to send you an email asking for more authorization.
Well, you just made my point again.
Yeah.
We messed up at the starting line. A phase 1 environmental audit should have been done, and possibly a phase 2.
And, so there were monitoring wells on the
Years ago.
operating until
Around
2012?
I think it's 2012 is when we got the clearance. It's probably about 2011. I think they were removed. 2010, 2011.
So in 2012, DEQ said because the monitoring wells are clear, you don't have to worry about this. I mean, what was the extent of their
They issue
discharge?
they call it a no further action required. So once that basically shows that the groundwater is clean. And there's
They
no
were
issues.
monitoring groundwater,
Not
not the tanks.
Right.
Somebody
Correct.
should have been
Yeah.
monitoring the tanks.
Well, and that's, I guess I could lump two things together. Around the same period, tanks were once again checked, and there was no issues found then either. So
But the deterioration of those tanks, could not that impact groundwater?
they could
Since
eventually.
2012, when we were given a clean bill of health?
That's why we're getting rid of them. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
further comments? Call for a vote. All in favor?
Reluctantly, aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Passes then. All right. Next matter on the agenda, submission 2022-042. Mr. Self?
Staff requests the Board of Commissioners to authorize the Executive Director to amend the purchase order for services with River West, Inc. We initially entered into an agreement with River West. They provide owner's representative for the port on our capital projects, and really due to its quality assurance, quality control, and they act as the owner representative to ensure that the work is done in accordance with our engineer and the design for the project. And with the volume of capital projects that we have ongoing, and due to the fact that there were 2 rigs doing pile driving at Pittsburgh 2 and 3, Nick? Yes, sir. The cost, the QA/QC work is escalated, and it's really just due to the timing of the capital projects. The cost of River West to do this work is built into the capital project. So we originally estimated, I think, $225,000. We're requesting $150,000 to get through the end of the year.
I'll make a motion to approve submission 2022-042.
I would second that motion.
All right. Have a motion by Mr. Darbone and a second by Mr. McCleary. Any discussion? None? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Submission 2022-043 regarding bid of Alfred Palmer. Mr. Self?
Staff requests the Board of Commissioners to authorize the Executive Director to accept the lowest responsive bid from Alfred Palmer LLC for the scalpel replacement at BT1 and amend the 2022 capital budget. Nick issued bids back in June. One bid was received from Alfred Palmer in the amount of $349,500 plus a contingency of $52,425 for a total of $401,000. The scalper was originally budgeted as a minor capital project, but with all the cost escalations, Nick bid it out. The cost came back again at $349,500. The installation, it includes the purchase and installation of the scalper, which is used at BT1 to ensure that the petroleum coke that we're loading isn't, oversized for the hold of the vessel. Todd can speak more, and Nick as well, as far as what our system requires.
We have a motion.
I'll make a motion, we approve.
Mr. Dixon moves.
I'll second.
Second by, I'm not really sure who seconded.
Give it to Keith.
Mr. Prudham, I believe. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay, that brings us to briefing notes. We have the Executive Director Quarterly Expense Briefing Note. I don't believe that requires any action.
No action required, but I'll answer any questions y'all have.
And that next up is the financials.
Yes, sir. So I'm going to start with the 6 months ended June 30th, 2022. For the 6 months ended, the port generated revenues of about $22.2 million, which was $5.5 million favorable. We saw higher tonnages of petroleum coke, barite, and lumber. We had higher labor earth revenue and some higher lease revenues. The expenses were about $1 million unfavorable, and that's primarily higher overall operating expenses with the higher tonnages, as you would expect to see. Depreciation was about $300,000 favorable, just due to the timing of completion of some of our projects. Non-operating revenues and expenses were $400,000 favorable. We saw higher interest income as those interest rates are going up. We're seeing more interest on our accounts. EBITDA was $5.5 million compared to $2.4 million budgeted, and we generated $4.9 million in cash flow. So pretty good 6 months ended. On to forecast 2, which is those 6 months plus our forecast for the remainder of the year, we're expecting very similar information as we saw in the first half, with revenues at about $40.6 million, mainly from higher petroleum coke, higher barite, lumber, LNG, and some higher lease revenues. Expenses are expected to be $1.3 million unfavorable, again due to those higher operating expenses with the higher tonnages. Non-operating revenues are expected to be around $400,000 favorable, again higher interest income. And then we expect to have finished with cash flow of about $8.6 million. So really good year. Or getting there. Onto the balance sheet. It's going to be most of the same stuff we've kind of heard throughout the year. With most of the changes coming from the new GASB, the P3, and hurricane recovery. So unrestricted cash is down 3.7 million, and restricted cash is up 2 million. Accounts receivable is up significantly due to that new GASB pronouncement. Government receivables up 1 million. That's an effect of the FEMA receivable and our Port Priority Program. Fixed assets are up 11.7 million. We have quite a few projects that have been completed, so building our fixed assets. Construction in progress is up 9.7 million. Quite a few projects ongoing. And our current liabilities were up 3.5 million just due to some of the outstanding contracts that are payable at the end of the month. One other thing I would like to mention that's in your packet, just on the traffic outlook. Most of our tonnages we expect to be in line with what we budgeted, but as mentioned, petroleum coke we expect to be around 125,000 tons higher, barite over 90,000 higher, and forest products, which includes all your lumber, about 165,000 tons higher. So looking good on the outlook for our traffic and our financials. Any questions on any of those? Feel free to ask. Thank you.
Questions? Okay. All right, Nick?
Go set briefing now?
No.
Yeah.
I'll do my GoSep briefing note with my monthly report. Just a tad bit of good news. FEMA did assign a value to a few of our larger projects. So on the FEMA briefing note, you'll see project totals increased about $32 million. So that's the one bit of good news I have. On the flip side of that, we've had quite a bit of pushback from GoSep lately. Some of the projects that have already been approved by FEMA, they get to GoSep reviews them, and they've been coming back with quite a few, issues that they've found, but we're trying to work through that. We have an email drafted to send to a higher up. We're trying to set up a phone call with higher ups at GoSep to get these issues resolved and see if we can, settle all that. So that's been our biggest pushback right now.
So if I could ask a question.
Go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
So the 15 million obligated from Laura, is that GoSep?
That's at GoSep. Yes, ma'am.
And how long approximately?
I'll say every amount is different, and it really depends. We've submitted requests for reimbursement for quite a bit of that, and GoSep has come back and said, hey, this isn't right, something's wrong here, even though the same information was submitted to FEMA, and FEMA already said it was all good. So that's what we're fighting with right now with GoSep. We've gone back and forth on quite a few projects that we expected to be paid out already, and it's been a
I will point
issue.
out that not all the 15 million has been expended.
Right.
By the
That
board.
is true.
That's not monies that we've expended already.
Right.
Of the 15, how much have we expended approximately?
I'd have to look back.
I don't have that number in front of me.
I can send you an email with how much that is.
And on the 300,000 plus for Delta, has that been expended?
Yes, ma'am. We have submitted requests for reimbursements, and that's actually one of them that we have had pushback from GoSep on trying to receive.
And just to give you an example of what they're asking for you to decide whether or not you think it's reasonable or not, but we will have entered into say we entered into a contract for $300,000, and that agreement is for $300,000. They're saying that it should have had language in there that said it is not to exceed $300,000.
So,
If we enter into a $300,000 contract, we're not paying more than $300,000.
so the federal agency has approved
Yes.
that, and now we have to go through another approval process with a state agency?
Yes. And it's issues like I just mentioned to you. The contract didn't include a not to exceed amount. When the contract was for $300,000. That's just a hypothetical, but that's literally what they're asking.
I think we've had this issue before, though, correct? I mean, this is kind of an ongoing issue.
Yes, absolutely.
And not just the Port of Lake Charles. Every entity is dealing with the
That's
same
it.
problem.
Yeah.
I guess that makes me feel a little better.
Right.
Misery loves company. Misery loves company.
Yeah.
Well, on that comment, and because I've raised this question, but do we know whether the same approach is happening by GoShip with other entities or agencies?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
We do.
So in other words, it's not a situation where the port is being singled out.
Right. No, sir.
Are they
And how do you
making
know
any,
that? You
they
call-
calling you back when you make phone calls?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Oh, they are?
We've gone back and forth, emails, phone calls, all of that, and they answer us.
And our delegation, what are they doing?
We haven't pushed it to that level quite yet. I actually had a great call with GoSep today where I was wrong on everything, but I got some information on how to move forward with it. So like you said, they are answering our calls.
Did they send you a form to fill out?
No, I got to create it myself. But
Oh,
yes, sir.
okay. All right.
They told me what to do, and they want us to amend the contracts to include not to exceed language, things like
Is there a benefit to GoShip to hold the money? Are they, I mean, is there,
It's not a benefit to the port, I can tell you that. I don't
I'm
know,
sorry?
Maybe to the state, maybe a benefit to the state, certainly not a benefit to the
well,
port.
that's what I'm asking. I mean, is it
But this
Yeah.
is not
is there a
state
benefit to
money.
them to hold the float?
Just
We
to add,
requested, we sent an email, I sent an email last week requesting a meeting with the director of GoSep.
it's, just to add to what Mr. Dixon said, it's something that we've dealt with the police jury. That's what they do.
Yeah.
They want you to give up, or they want you to use some other type of scenario to get what it is that you need, because as everybody's asking for money, so it makes it hard on them to find out and really realize who it's gonna go to. But you fighting a fight you don't have to fight. That's why we have our delegation. You don't, I come here and I hear these meetings saying you're talking back and forth with them and this and that. You're just somebody, not to demean you in any way, but you're just another person they're visiting with. It makes no difference. Our delegation is what needs to be helping you fight this fight, to be honest with you. And I mean, it's gonna continue to go this way if this is the type of language and stuff that we use. They're gonna put you off to another year.
And there is an election coming up.
So, don't fight a fight you don't have to fight. That's what those guys in Baton Rouge are for, and Washington. Use those guys.
We'll do it.
Well, and I would point out that there's another 82 million that
That's way.
has not been obligated yet, so, we could all be,
Yes, ma'am.
thank you.
Anything further, Ken?
Yes, sir.
That enough?
All right, brings us to, let's see. What do I have here?
Department reports, I think.
Yeah, next I have Channing next.
Mr. President, in addition to my monthly report, as everybody knows, the Congress passed the FY '22 budget a while back, and we've finally gotten some details on that. It's not as good as we'd like. We asked for about $34.5 million in O&M funds, operation and maintenance, and $9 million in construction funds. The president's budget was $9 million in construction funds, which, as it went through the process of congressional approval, Congress approved the $9 million in construction. So we have that, plus the non-federal sponsors match to go on with the construction program for the disposal sites. That's not the issue. The president's budget for O&M was $20 million. And for the first time that I can remember, when it went through Congress, it was cut to $17.5 million. So we needed $34.5 million in O&M, and about half of that came out of Congress. So we were looking for the Corps of Engineers to make up the difference in its work plan. The Corps of Engineers gave us $19.5 million in their work plan, except the funds were restricted. Again, something that we had never seen before. And that $19.5 million or so was only allowed to be spent on the saltwater barrier. So we were still short dredging funds. Between the district and division, another $10 million in O&M was found. So right now, we're coming to the end of FY '22, and we're still $8 million short. And we spoke to the people in Washington. Last week, we had an abbreviated visit to Washington. It was all done virtually. But during our conversations with the Corps headquarters staff, we pointed out all of these problems. The $10 million that we got from the Corps in addition was from reprogramming funds, and the Corps is looking to reprogram other funds and to see if we can pick up the extra $8 million we need. The problem is, if we don't get that money, work that we plan to do this year will have to be pushed off until next year. And then that starts rolling, and we get behind in our dredging and not in our construction, but in our dredging. So that's what we're addressing right now. Hopefully I'll have better news at some future board meeting where we picked up some additional funds. With that, if there's any questions about either what I just reported or the monthly report, be happy to answer.
I'm concerned about this amount of money that you're talking about going to the, what did you say?
Saltwater barrier?
Saltwater barrier. Every time I go down there, it's closed. So, I mean, what are they doing now?
This is not for operation of the saltwater barrier.
Okay.
This is for repairs, construction, maintenance of the saltwater barrier.
So somebody's checking it out?
Say again?
So somebody's checking out the saltwater barrier?
Well, the saltwater barrier is part of the Calcasieu River and Pass project.
I understand that, and I know why it was put there.
Okay.
But the problem I have with it, if we don't keep this channel open, there's no need for the saltwater barriers, you know, so just let it flow through.
You preach it to the choir, Mr. Dixon. Yes, sir. Except the farmers are gonna get a little upset.
Where? Where? You know, if they can't get your products out from up here, who's gonna be upset up here? You know, that just doesn't make sense.
It was something we had never seen before, that they put a restriction on funds, and they gave that much money to the saltwater barrier. Normally, they let the district decide how much is gonna be spent.
Okay, thank you. Just to echo a little bit of what Mr. Dixon said, I wasn't sure if you said you met with some of the representatives in Washington, or was it done virtual?
It was done virtually.
Did you
They
get a
wouldn't
chance-
let me up there.
Okay, did you get a chance to speak to Mr. Higgins? Clay?
No, he was not part of the virtual meetings. We met with the Corps staff, Senate, EPW, and OMB virtually. The personal meetings have been rescheduled, and we're going to try and do that the week of September the 12th.
So there was nobody locally from this area that you had a chance to meet with, am I correct in saying that?
That is correct.
Okay. You mentioned about the dredging, and it may have to be moved back because of the money is not gonna be available. How big of a stress does that put on us economically, Channing, for the port? Is that gonna be something that's gonna put a little bit of a financial stress on us because of that?
I don't know how to answer that. It depends on what the shoaling rates are, how many storms we get, that kind of stuff. If we have a good year, no, it's not gonna hurt the port or any of the other operators. We have a bad year, yes, it is.
That's all, Mr. President.
There's no indication at all where this idea of restricting the funds came from? I mean, it just came out of the blue? Or you just don't want to say?
No, I have no idea. I can guess, but I don't think I'd like to guess in public about that.
I can respect that.
Wow.
So do you feel that our congressional delegation is aware of the?
Oh, they are. Mr. Higgins, Mr. Cassidy, their staff has been great. They always are supporting us. They are aware of the issue. The fact that I didn't get a chance to talk to Congressman Higgins, he's aware of what's going on.
And we're gonna go in person in September.
Okay, are the restriction of these funds, is that something that is happening with other channels?
Not that I know of. I've
As
never
far as
seen.
you know, it's unique to,
I've never seen this before. Now, you got to remember, this started in like 2014 or 15 when they eliminated earmarks.
right?
And so then they gave the Corps discretionary funding. This is the first time we've seen the discretionary funding restricted the way it is in this budget.
Thank you, Channing.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments? All right. Oops, sorry. Brings us to Todd.
Yes, sir. Currently at City Docks, we've got a loader and a pilot ship working. Recently, we've had 3 cargo transfers at City Docks, 7 aluminum hydrate barges, 2 sodium hyposulfate or sulfide vessels, 11,000-ton bag rice vessel, and 1 20,000 cubic meter motor vessel that's already finished. Next on the schedule, we've got another lumber shipment, 3 hydrate barges, another hydrosulfate shipment, another cargo transport of about 20,000 tons. We're doing our first rubber export freight bulk operation, and 6,000 metric ton bag rice shipment, and a project cargo shipment. Right now, at VT1, we're loading a raw coat shipments, about 45,000 tons. Recently, we've done 12,000 tons of calcine, 18,000 tons of rutile, 6,000 tons of green coke, and about 2,000 tons of aluminum hydrate. Going forward on the schedule right now, we've got 3 rutile ships for about 20,000 tons and 2,000 tons of calcine. So staying busy.
Questions or comments for Tom?
This may be something for you and Ferentz, but I noticed that you had a call concerning the loading of wood chips, which is something that when we did our long-range plan was mentioned to us as a lucrative market, so.
Yeah, we've had several
Lots of
calls
comments.
about wood chips. And the issue that we have with wood chips right now is we don't have an efficient way of loading the wood chips. It's possible, but it's kind of similar to the situation that we're in at BT1 with the petroleum coke. We can load it, but until Nick gets my ship loader here, it's very labor extensive and expensive. And so, until we have some way of doing it automated, it's not really feasible for them to load the wood chips, nor do we have a really good place to store the quantity that they're looking for. So at City Docks. So there's some issues. We're discussing it with them. Right now there's not a real slick way to load them other than using ship's gear, which is slow and it's labor intensive.
And probably makes us non-competitive now.
Correct. It's not just here, though. I mean, they're checking every port on the Gulf, and there's just very few that have a way of loading it like we load our petroleum coke.
And where would it be coming from?
Could be coming from North Louisiana, could be coming from Southeast Texas, East Texas, all those areas.
Any more? Terrence, Carver on Trade.
Yes, Mr. President. Been working with a construction company. They're looking to lease some property where they repair and construct and repurpose barges and vessels. They sent a group in about 2 weeks ago to look at Industrial Canal, and they're sending their VP and Business Development Manager next week to look at the property. We also have an advertisement in the Heavy Lift magazine for July-August issue. We have an advertisement and article coming out in the American Journal of Transportation. We also have a bid for some USDA cargo that goes out this week for about 17,000 tons of cargo with some rice on it. And as Todd mentioned, we have our first ever rubber vessel that's loading out to go to Spain and Poland. I'll answer any questions if you have any.
Questions for Terrence? Comments? Engineering, Nick?
Yes, sir, Mr. President. Just wanted to give you an update on the Shed 7 demolition. Asbestos remediation is progressing nicely. It looks like we're going to be right at that the updated estimate that we established at I think it was 2 meetings ago now. Most of the debris is hauled off. We're just finalizing the demo of the concrete foundations. Berth 2 and 3 construction is moving along nicely. I think we've driven around 220 piles to date out of about 566. Bow Brothers is moving along, progressing. Also, I don't know if anyone saw, but the Office of Offshore Energy Management, Bureau of Offshore Energy Management, released a statement and a survey talking about the offshore wind studies in the Gulf of Mexico, and the Port of Lake Charles was specifically called out as a potential supply port. It's the only one in Louisiana, since most of the offshore wind would be South Louisiana and East Texas. So just wanted to throw that out there. Hopefully that will help us with our study grant we applied for.
Any questions? All right, we have a lobbying report, I understand.
We don't have anybody here from the state lobbies, but we have Andrew here from PCAR Group to discuss the Washington situation.
Thanks, Ricky. Hey, everyone. I'm Andrew Holloman here representing PCAR Group. I work with Chuck Cluckley, who I know y'all all know pretty well. And I was going to raise my hand when y'all were talking earlier, but I didn't want to speak out of turn. So, yeah, Ricky asked me just to come and kind of give you guys like a quarterly update of what we've been working on. And Channing already covered a good bit of it. Just a little bit about my background. I'm originally from New Iberia, but I spent 10 years in D.C. Working public and private sector. I worked for Senator Landrieu for a number of years, and some of the issues that I worked on were ports and waterways. I worked for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, which I'm sure y'all know, and they kind of have jurisdiction over the natural gas pipelines, LNG facilities. I then went on to work for Cheniere Energy, and then tell people I saw the light and moved back home. So I'm here now. Thank you all for allowing me to say some thanks to the board and President Lorenzi. Congratulations. Part of what I want to talk about was last week's meetings. I think they went well. I mean, I think, we've had the pleasure of representing the port on the federal level for about 18 months. I think we have a good working relationship. We've got a lot of work to do going forward, as you know. One thing I did want to mention, the President's budget in general was lower than it has been historically for traditional infrastructure funding for ports and waterways. So, I mean, it's unfortunate, but I don't think necessarily Port of Lake Charles was singled out, but I agree we have plenty of work to do there. One of the things that I think was good from last week, Senate Energy and Public Works, EPW, the committee we met with, and Channing gave them a great presentation, as well as Office of Management and Budget. That's kind of the authorizing committee and the money manager for the Army Corps of Engineers. So keeping good relationships with them is paramount, and we'll continue to do so. One of the other things I wanted to mention, we did have a meeting scheduled where all members of the Louisiana delegation were scheduled to be in person and to kind of give them a brief. I can tell you, 10 years of working there and working around the Louisiana delegation, frankly, it doesn't happen a lot where you have all members of the delegation willing to kind of sit in a room together unless they think it's something really important. So I know that we're going to try to get those scheduled for September. So that'll be a really good opportunity to talk to each member of the delegation about projects and priorities for the port. I did have a little bit of a list on kind of what to expect the rest of the year from DC. As you can imagine, it's not much. It's an election year. Congress is slow on any given year, but especially in election years. All 435 members of the House and 35 members of the Senate are up for re-election this year. The House is expected to flip. I mean, nothing's a sure thing, but in politics, it's about as close as you can get as a sure thing for the House to flip and be controlled by Republicans. The Senate is still kind of a toss-up, but it's still likely leaning Republican. And you get from that kind of shake-up in congressional committees. Now Louisiana has an appropriator or another appropriator, so Senator Kennedy and now Congresswoman Letlow. Congressman Higgins also may be in line for some, he's on the House Homeland Security Committee, he may be in line for a leadership position there. The other thing I wanted to mention too, and Channing had mentioned this, is they're kind of in appropriation season right now in DC, and the House released a package of appropriations bills that they passed, and in that there's $9 million that were secured for the port. And the Senate hasn't released their report yet for appropriations, but they're expected to this week. And so we're going to continue working with the delegation to fight for that. But I mean, it's a great sign that there's $9 million in there for the port. And so what it is they used to call them earmarks. They can't do that anymore, so they call them community project funding. It's earmarks by another name. They just rebranded it, basically. I think that was it. I wanted to, again, thank you guys. And if you have any questions now, I'm happy to answer. Always please feel free to reach out, and I hope to come back and give y'all another update after we have those meetings in September.
Questions?
Yeah, I guess I'm on the road tonight, Mr. President. The meeting in September, help me understand, is that meeting that's going to occur, we're going to be asking for funds, or is that going to be an answer as to what we need now? That's what I'm confused about, the meeting that we're going to be having in September.
Sure, go ahead, Shane. Yeah.
gonna be both.
Okay.
If we don't have the money we need.
Channing, I'm telling you, it's a waste of time if we don't,
We're gonna be up there,
it's a waste of time if we don't, Channing.
and we're gonna be talking about 23 and 24 also.
Okay. Because it's a waste of time. If they can't give us an answer, it's a waste of time to even go.
We've wasted our time before, and we'll do it again.
That's all, Mr. President.
Thank you. Further questions, comments?
Thank y'all, appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anything more on the lobbying front? Do I have a motion regarding executive session or any other matters? I guess I should ask for it first.
Mr. President, I move that we go into executive session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Executive session.